Have you ever experienced an inexplicable chill during a conversation with someone? As if something invisible but deeply disturbing was moving beneath the surface of their seemingly innocent smile. Carl Jung, one of history's most brilliant psychologists, identified during his decades of clinical work an alarming pattern. There exists a silent indicator that reveals a danger much greater than any explicit physical threat. This signal, often overlooked by our rational mind but perceived by our most primitive instinct, does not manifest through aggressive words or overtly toxic behaviors. It is more subtle, and precisely because of this, infinitely more dangerous. Ancient traditions already warned against these people. But Jung managed to articulate scientifically what our ancestors intuited. The most disturbing thing is that this signal can manifest in individuals who appear completely normal, even fascinating, and when you recognize it, the only sensible response is to distance yourself immediately. But before we continue, please like the video, share it with people who might appreciate it, and write in the comments which city you're following our YouTube channel from. Shadow projection represents perhaps the most dangerous psychological mechanism that Jung identified in human relationships. Imagine this situation. You're dialoguing with someone who suddenly attributes to you intentions, thoughts, or negative characteristics that you have never expressed or demonstrated. This person is not reacting to you, but to a distorted version they have created in their mind. Does this sound familiar? What you're experiencing in that moment is Jungian shadow projection in its purest form. The shadow represents everything we reject about ourselves. Those aspects we consider unacceptable and relegate to the unconscious. However, these elements don't vanish. They simply remain outside our conscious vision, accumulating energy in the depths of our psyche. When someone systematically projects their own shadow onto others, they are manifesting the most dangerous signal Jung identified: the absolute inability to recognize their own denied aspects. This person literally cannot see these elements in themselves, so they perceive them exclusively in others. The danger lies in the fact that from their perspective, you are truly embodying those negative aspects. Ancient spiritual traditions understood this phenomenon long before Jung articulated it academically. In Buddhism, they speak of the clouded mirror that reflects one's own impurities as if they were foreign. In the Christian tradition, we find the metaphor of the beam in one's own eye while pointing to the speck in another's eye. What is truly alarming is that the person projecting their own shadow is completely convinced of the validity of their perceptions. It's not that they're consciously lying. They really see in you what they deny in themselves. This perceptual distortion generates a particular type of conviction that is extremely persuasive to third parties. Those who project can convince others that you are exactly as they describe you. Contemporary neuroscientists have confirmed what Jung postulated. Our brains literally filter reality to confirm our pre-existing beliefs. However, in cases of massive shadow projection, this filter becomes a complete distortion of reality. Researcher Robert Johnson compared this phenomenon to wearing glasses that transform everything we see. But how do you identify when you're facing someone who massively projects their own shadow? The revealing signal appears when you perceive a disconnection between what this person says about you and your inner experience. They accuse you of motivations you've never had or attribute to you emotions you haven't felt. And the most disturbing thing, they do it with absolute certainty, impervious to any contrary evidence. What is really happening when you experience this? You're facing the external manifestation of an internal war. This person is desperately fighting against parts of themselves they cannot accept, and you have involuntarily become the battlefield. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, says the ancient proverb. But Jung would add, and traveled by those who consider themselves unquestionably good. Ego inflation represents an extraordinary danger precisely because it disguises itself as virtue. When you observe someone completely convinced of their moral superiority, their spiritual infallibility, or of possessing absolute truth, you are witnessing what Jung called psychic inflation. Perhaps the most alarming sign of all. Unlike simple arrogance that is easily recognizable, Jungian inflation is a much deeper and more dangerous phenomenon. It occurs when a person's ego identifies with archetypal contents, especially with the image of the Savior, the Enlightened One, or the bearer of truth. This person no longer perceives themselves as a limited human being, but as a direct representative of the divine or absolute. The German mystic master Eckhart warned centuries ago against this phenomenon, describing it as the most subtle trap on the spiritual path. Zen traditions call it Zen sickness, while Sufis speak of the veil of light, more dangerous than the veil of darkness because it's much more difficult to recognize as an obstacle. The unmistakable sign appears when you notice that this person never doubts their own motivations. While all the great sages in history have expressed profound humility before the mysteries of existence, those who suffer from psychic inflation show absolute certainty. They don't contemplate the possibility of error because in their mind they're not expressing personal opinions but universal truths. What is particularly dangerous about this state is that it can generate extraordinary charisma. Jung observed how leaders with severe psychic inflation attracted devoted followers precisely because of the absolute conviction they radiated. This certainty satisfies our deep human need for security and definitive answers in a world of uncertainties. Chilean psychologist Claudio Naranjo, a student of spiritual traditions, pointed out that the spiritual ego is the most refined and difficult to detect. An ordinary ego proclaims, "I am important." An inflated ego proclaims, "I am a channel of the supreme good." This subtle difference explains why so many people are attracted to potentially dangerous individuals who nevertheless appear spiritually elevated. How to recognize psychic inflation in someone. Observe their reaction to criticism or disagreement. The person with archetypal ego inflation doesn't process questioning as useful information but as an affront to the cosmic order itself. They interpret any opposition not as a legitimate human disagreement but as resistance to the good, truth, or divine that they represent. Jung warned that this state represents a danger not only to others but mainly to the one who experiences it. The identification of the small ego with transpersonal contents subjects the psyche to unbearable tension that eventually demands compensation. The greater the inflation, the more dramatic the collapse when the denied aspects finally emerge. What could be more unsettling than someone who shows you exactly what you expect to see at all times and circumstances? Jung discovered a disturbing pattern in certain individuals. A social adaptation so perfect it eliminates any roughness, contradiction, or human spontaneity. This impeccable mask or persona, a term Jung took from Greek theater, represents a warning signal that our instincts detect long before our conscious mind can articulate it. Total identification with the persona constitutes an extraordinary psychological danger because it indicates complete dissociation between the external image and the inner being. The individual has sacrificed their own authenticity on the altar of social acceptance, creating a facade so elaborate that even they themselves have forgotten what exists behind it. As poet Fernando Pessoa expressed, the danger is not in the mask but in forgetting that it is a mask. Eastern contemplative traditions have pointed to this phenomenon for millennia. In Zen Buddhism they speak of the original face before birth, that essential authenticity that exists beyond our social constructions. Taoist masters warned against the danger of polishing the surface so much that the substance wears away. Jung simply translated these ancient observations into the language of modern psychology. The warning signal arises when you perceive a strange sense of artificiality in interactions with someone. Even though their behavior is technically impeccable, this person always knows what to say, how to act, what facial expressions to adopt. But all of this lacks the unpredictability and incongruities inherent in authentic humanity. As Jungian analyst James Hollis pointed out, excessive perfection in social adaptation often indicates a proportional emptiness in inner life. Contemporary neuroscientists have identified a fascinating phenomenon related to this dynamic. Our brains are equipped with mirror neurons that detect subtle incongruities between others' verbal, facial, and bodily expressions. When someone's social mask is completely divorced from their inner reality, these neurons generate a warning signal that we experience as an inexplicable feeling of unease or distrust. The real danger lies in what this extreme dissociation hides. When someone has invested all their psychic energy in maintaining a perfect external image, the rejected aspects of the personality don't simply disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, forming what Jung called the shadow. And the more rigid the persona, the more chaotic and potentially destructive their shadow will be when it inevitably emerges. Marie-Louise von Franz, a close collaborator of Jung, observed that those who present perfect social adaptation often experience episodes of shadow eruption, moments when all the repressed energy explodes in unpredictable and potentially destructive ways. This dynamic explains why often the apparently most perfect people are capable of surprisingly destructive acts. Complete identification with the social persona represents, in Jung's words, a betrayal of the self, an abandonment of authentic individuality in favor of an artificial construction. And like all profound betrayals, it eventually takes its psychological toll. Imagine you're conversing with someone and suddenly you perceive a subtle but profound change. The same person physically, but something fundamental has changed in their gaze, in their energy, in the quality of their presence, as if something ancient and transpersonal were manifesting through them. This disturbing experience, which many traditional cultures recognized as a form of possession, was conceptualized by Jung as archetypal possession, perhaps the most alarming signal we can detect in another human being. Archetypes, according to Jung, are primordial patterns of the human collective psyche, structuring forces of our experience that contain both luminous and shadowy aspects. When an archetype possesses a person's consciousness, they lose their individuality and become a channel for transpersonal energies that far exceed their capacity for integration. Shamanic traditions of various cultures perfectly understood this phenomenon. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented how shamans differentiated between controlled states of channeling and dangerous states of possession where individual identity was completely absorbed. Christian mysticism spoke of discernment of spirits as the essential ability to distinguish beneficial psychic influences from potentially destructive ones. The warning signal arises when you perceive that someone has lost normal psychological flexibility, becoming rigidly identified with a single archetypal pattern. It may be the unquestionable savior, the relentless warrior, the perpetual victim, the infallible judge. The specific archetype matters less than the complete identification with it. Revealing indicators include a strange glow in the eyes, a monolithic quality in speech, and a peculiar feeling that the person is no longer completely present in the ordinary sense. As Jungian analyst Robert Moore pointed out, you're not relating to a complete human personality, but to an archetypal fragment that has usurped control of consciousness. Modern neuropsychology has identified altered states of consciousness where certain brain areas associated with personal identity show reduced activity, while areas linked to transpersonal experiences are intensely activated. These states, valuable in controlled ritual contexts, can be extremely dangerous when they occur spontaneously without the appropriate container. What is particularly alarming is that the person possessed by an archetype experiences an extraordinary sense of certainty and purpose. The ambiguity of ordinary consciousness disappears, replaced by an absolute conviction that can be extremely persuasive to others. Jung observed how political and religious leaders in states of archetypal possession could catalyze mass movements precisely because of this quality of superhuman certainty. The fundamental danger lies in the fact that archetypes, as primordial patterns of the collective unconscious, contain extreme polarities. The same archetype of the savior contains both the potential for redemptive compassion and destructive fanaticism. When a person becomes completely identified with an archetype, they will inevitably manifest its darkest aspects, often without any awareness of the contradiction. Jung documented numerous cases where individuals possessed by archetypes committed acts completely contrary to their conscious values, later experiencing partial amnesia or extreme rationalization. Archetypal possession represents the temporary loss of the capacity for self-reflection, precisely what makes us human. There exists a psychological phenomenon so disturbing that when you recognize it in someone, you understand you are witnessing a genuine tragedy in development. Jung called it compulsion to repeat, an unconscious pattern where the person obsessively recreates the same painful situations, as if trapped in an invisible labyrinth from which they cannot escape. This signal, when we clearly detect it in another, warns us that we're facing an extraordinary danger, being involved in a psychological drama that doesn't belong to us. What is truly alarming about the compulsion to repeat is its automatic and unconscious quality. The person is not consciously or maliciously choosing to recreate destructive patterns. They are responding to deep psychic forces that operate completely outside their awareness. As psychoanalyst Christopher Ballas expressed, they are unthought knowns, formative experiences so early or traumatic that they were never cognitively processed but organize all subsequent experience. Spiritual traditions have recognized this phenomenon for millennia. The Buddhist concept of karma originally did not refer to a cosmic system of reward and punishment, but precisely to these conditioning patterns that lead us to recreate similar circumstances over and over again. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea of original sin can be psychologically interpreted as these unconscious patterns we inherit and perpetuate without conscious choice. The revealing sign appears when you observe someone who consistently ends up in the same painful situations with different people but following an amazingly similar script. Even more disturbing, the person seems sincerely surprised each time the pattern repeats, as if they were a victim of destiny instead of the unconscious architect of their own recurring experience. Contemporary neurosciences have discovered a biological basis for this phenomenon. Early experiences, especially traumatic ones, literally create neural pathways that become paths of least resistance for information processing. The brain develops a neurological expectation that unconsciously seeks to confirm its pre-existing models of the world, even when these models produce suffering. The most dangerous aspect is that people trapped in unconscious repetition compulsions unconsciously try to recruit others to play roles in their unresolved internal drama. As psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott pointed out, unprocessed trauma demands to be staged. Without realizing it, we can find ourselves playing a role in a story that began long before we met this person. Jung observed a fascinating phenomenon. The more unconscious the compulsion to repeat, the more it seems to manifest as synchronicities or significant coincidences in external life. The person unconsciously creates situations that replicate their unresolved internal dynamics, but experiences these events as if they were imposed by a cruel or unjust external fate. Jungian therapists identify this signal when they hear someone repeatedly narrating stories where they are always betrayed, abandoned, misunderstood, or victimized in surprisingly similar ways. As Marie-Louise von Franz expressed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What is most disturbing is that the compulsion to repeat has an almost magnetic quality. The person trapped in these patterns unconsciously emits signals that attract precisely those who can help them recreate their original traumatic scenarios. Jung called this phenomenon negative synchronicity, the extraordinary ability of the unconscious to orchestrate encounters that perpetuate its unresolved patterns. If the signals we have explored reveal the deepest dangers according to Jung, there exists a transformative path that transcends these threats: the conscious integration of the shadow. This process represents the fundamental difference between psychologically dangerous people and those who have embarked on the journey toward psychic wholeness. The fascinating thing is that we can recognize this integration as clearly as we identify its absence. And when we perceive it in someone, we are facing the antithesis of psychological danger. Shadow integration does not mean moral perfection or absence of negative aspects. On the contrary, it implies a humble and conscious recognition of one's own capacity for all the errors and darkness we observe in others. As Jung expressed, "I would rather be whole than good," a frequently misunderstood phrase that really points to the difference between authentic psychological integrity and a mask of perfection that hides dangerous internal divisions. Contemplative traditions have articulated this process for millennia with different languages. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of transforming poison into medicine, recognizing and constructively using even the most difficult emotions and tendencies. Western alchemy, which fascinated Jung so much, symbolically represented this process as the transmutation of lead, rejected aspects, into gold, integrated consciousness. The indicators of a person who has genuinely begun this process of integration are unmistakable. A particular combination of honesty about their own shadow sides and compassion toward others' shadow sides. This person can admit their own problematic impulses and tendencies without excessive shame or self-indulgence, simply as aspects of the human condition that require constant awareness. Contemporary neurosciences have confirmed that this integration process has observable neurophysiological correlates. Researchers like Daniel Siegel have documented how the integration of previously dissociated aspects of experience literally creates new neural connections between different brain regions, particularly between primitive emotional centers and prefrontal areas associated with self-reflection. What is truly transformative about this process is that, Paradoxically, consciously recognizing our most difficult aspects dramatically reduces the likelihood of unconsciously manifesting them. As Jungian analyst Robert Johnson observed, what we deny does not disappear. It simply emerges in forms over which we have less control. Conscious integration transforms potentially destructive psychic energy into available creative force. The person who has genuinely initiated this inner work exhibits a unique quality: the ability to see the world in shades of gray instead of absolute black and white. They don't rigidly divide between good and bad, recognizing universal human complexity. As Jungian psychologist James Hollis pointed out, psychological maturity begins when we abandon the fantasy of our absolute innocence. Authentic spiritual teachers throughout history have embodied this integration. The Dalai Lama can speak openly about his moments of anger. Teresa of Avila recognized her periods of spiritual aridity. The Sufi mystic Rumi wrote poetically about his internal contradictions. This radical honesty contrasts dramatically with the artificial perfection of those who are dissociated from their shadows. The most reliable indicator of integration in process is a particular combination of genuine humility, not false modesty, and authentic authority, not authoritarianism. The integrated person doesn't need to proclaim their goodness or wisdom because they have transcended the need for an immaculate self-image. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki expressed, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's there are few." Before we say goodbye, have you recognized any of these signals in important people in your life? Or more importantly, have you detected aspects of these patterns in yourself? If this message touched your heart, write in the comments. Awareness is the first step toward transformation. Don't forget to share this content with those who need to awaken to the unconscious patterns in their relationships. Activate the bell and subscribe for more explorations of the fascinating Jungian universe.
Have you ever reflected on the hidden meaning behind the month of your birth? Initially it might appear as something superficial, a simple curiosity devoid of relevance, but for Carl Jung, one of the most revolutionary personalities in psychology, the date of your arrival on this earth was far from fortuitous. In reality, he was convinced that it was intimately linked to symbolic energies that shape our innermost essence. Jung theorized that the month of your birth contains much more than mere climatic significance. It functions as a symbolic portal, revealing fundamental clues about your psychological configuration, your hidden possibilities, the emotional lessons you must learn, and even the nature of the energy you spontaneously emit into the world. This is not about divination or irrational beliefs, but about a psychological perspective that allows us to acquire a deeper understanding of ourselves. But before continuing, like the video, share it with people who could benefit from it, and write in the comments which city you follow our YouTube channel from. Let's consider for a moment that deciphering the symbolism of your birth month could liberate hidden aspects of your identity, that it could give you a clearer vision of your habits, moods, and even your existential mission. Sounds excessive, doesn't it? However, when we begin to examine Jung's conceptions regarding archetypes, the universal unconscious and natural patterns, this concept acquires a much more convincing logic. In this investigation, we will delve into Carl Jung's temporal symbolic interpretation, specifically on how each month of the year contains a particular psychological energy and how such energy can subtly condition the character traits, emotional inclinations, and even spiritual orientation of those born during that period. But before beginning, if you are a person who values depth, meaning, and personal exploration, consider subscribing to our channel. We constantly offer materials that challenge traditional reasoning and encourage you to meditate more intensely on who you are and what drives you. By becoming part of our group, you will enter a community that seeks evolution not through superficial suggestions, but through deep inner understanding. Now breathe deeply, because what you are about to hear could not only transform your vision of your birth month, but also modify how you perceive your narrative, your patterns, and the path you have undertaken so far. This is not about classifying people into categories, it's about unveiling the patterns already woven into the fabric of your existence. Jung's conception of archetypes. Let's start from Carl Jung's fundamental belief that the universe is full of recurring patterns, what he called archetypes. These represent universal images, narratives, and energies that emerge in all civilizations, legends, and human experiences. They exist both outside and inside us, and Jung was convinced that each of us contains a peculiar combination of these archetypes within ourselves, influencing our way of reasoning, feeling emotions, and behaving. Furthermore, he was convinced that nature's rhythms, like seasonal cycles, also reflect these archetypes. Winter's icy stillness, spring's germinating energy, summer's full magnificence, and autumn's contemplative tranquility. Each season corresponds to a different psychological energy. And since each month is part of a specific portion of the year, it too possesses symbolic relevance. According to Jung, the month of your birth doesn't simply represent a date on the calendar, it's a symbolic imprint. It's the temporal moment when you made your entrance into the world, and that moment is charged with meaning. The context, seasonal energy, brightness or darkness, the sensation of beginning or conclusion. All this shapes the emotional and symbolic atmosphere in which you came to light. Think about March, for example, a month of transition. In the northern hemisphere, it indicates the transition from winter to spring. Snow dissolves, days lengthen, and existence begins to awaken again. For Jung, someone born in a transitional month like March or September, when summer gives way to autumn, may contain within themselves a dual nature. They might perceive tension between two universes, between stillness and dynamism, inner reflection and outer expression. These subjects often possess an amplified sensitivity toward change. They are attuned to variations in their context and emotions, and are inclined to seek balance between opposites. Now compare this with someone born in a month like January or July. These are moments of solidity, when a season has fully established itself. People born during these periods often represent the energy of structure and constancy. Jung connected them to archetypes of tenacity, inner robustness, and long-term perspective. They are the builders, the coordinators, those who naturally aspire to generate order and solid foundations. They possess psychological resistance, a capacity to endure and assist others in doing the same. What Jung found intriguing is that time itself is not impartial. It has a rhythm, an atmosphere, and a story. And when we are born at a specific moment of this developing story, we absorb a certain symbolic tonality, like background music that subtly conditions our thoughts, behaviors, and emotional reactions. It doesn't establish your fate, but offers guidance, a symbolic structure you can use to understand yourself more deeply. This symbolic guidance doesn't tell you what you must accomplish, rather it reveals the energies you will probably experience within yourself, both the powers you can rely on and the shadows you are called to confront. For Jung, self-awareness is the key to freedom, and part of that awareness derives from understanding the archetypal forces into which you were born. The intriguing aspect of this conception is that it transforms something we usually ignore, like the month of our birth, into a powerful tool for self-reflection. Suddenly, the date on your birth certificate is not just information, it's a passage, a method to connect with the deeper rhythms of nature, psychology, and spirit. The meaning of your birth month. So now we come to the fundamental question. What does your birth month reveal about your soul's journey? Each month, according to Jung's symbolic reasoning, connects to a particular archetype, an eternal inner pattern that dwells within all of us but is more predominant in some people than others. Understanding these patterns can unveil why you are attracted to certain roles in existence, why certain trials recur, and where your innate wisdom lies. In the following parts, we will explore the hidden meaning behind each month of the year, from January's silent depth to November's mysterious metamorphosis. You will see how understanding Jung's archetypes allows us to discover meaning in the rhythms of time itself. We will begin by traversing the symbolism of the year's initial months, and you might discover reflections of yourself in places you had never imagined. But remember that this is not about adapting to a predetermined model. The archetypes Jung described are not containers, they are reflections. They don't bind you, they assist you in recognizing what is already present in you but perhaps has not yet been identified. January, the archetype of the veteran or the sage. January begins with quietude. In numerous regions of the world, it represents the coldest and most silent period of the year, a season of immobility, meditation, and introspection. It symbolizes not only a new beginning but also a pause to reflect on the year that has passed. Jung associated January with the archetype of the veteran or the sage. People born in January often manifest a sense of depth, maturity, and responsibility from a young age. They might not always be the most communicative, but when they express themselves, others pay attention. They possess natural wisdom, a capacity to contemplate existence from a broader perspective. They are inclined to value long-term objectives, durability, and applied wisdom. Even though they may appear reserved, they are often quietly resolute and extraordinarily steady. But like all archetypes, this possesses its shadow. The sage can become excessively cautious, too austere, or isolated. Individuals born in January may struggle to maintain connection with joy or spontaneity if they carry too much of this serious energy. The key element is embracing their wisdom while remembering to allow space for lightheartedness. February, the archetype of the prophet or the rebel. February still holds winter's chill, but something begins to transform. There exists a hidden current of change, of possibility, of what might manifest. For Jung, this month resonates with the archetype of the prophet, one who sees beyond the present toward what is achievable. Those born in February often possess powerful imagination, a love for innovation, and an impulse to break free from conventions. They tend to be autonomous thinkers who don't like being limited by conventional structures. There exists something subtly subversive in their nature, not for the pleasure of subversion itself, but because they glimpse an alternative path to follow. Many of them are intensely creative and emotionally delicate, even if they don't always manifest it. However, the prophet can occasionally feel isolated or misunderstood. They live in the realm of conceptions and ideals, which can make daily life limiting or frustrating. The trial for those born in February is discovering methods to anchor their illuminations and transfer their visions into the concrete world. March, the archetype of the resurrected or the illuminator. March indicates a significant turning point in the northern hemisphere. It announces the start of spring, existence reawakening after winter's icy sleep. In Jung's symbolic conception, March belongs to the archetype of the resurrected, one who emerges from darkness toward light, from lethargy toward development. People born in March often possess deep emotional sensitivity. They perceive things intensely and may have a strong intuitive sense of the world around them. Often there exists a spiritual or artistic quality in them, a connection with natural cycles and emotional renewal. These are individuals who can transform numerous times in existence. They are resilient even though they seem fragile. The risk for the resurrected is being overwhelmed by their own emotional depth or losing themselves in their inner universe. Individuals born in March must pay attention to boundaries and balance their rich inner life with a grounded outer presence. April, the archetype of the warrior or the pioneer. April presents itself on the scene with energy and dynamism. Days extend, existence accelerates, and everything seems to be in movement. This month carries the fiery and active energy of the warrior or pioneer, the archetype of courage, action, and personal determination. Those born in April often manifest a courageous and decisive nature. They are natural pioneers, always prepared to dive into something new. There exists passionate intensity in them, and they are inclined to lead even when they're not trying to. They don't hesitate to fight for what they believe in and transmit contagious energy to people around them. However, the warrior archetype can become impulsive or aggressive if not balanced with awareness. Individuals born in April might struggle with patience or have a tendency to exhaust themselves by pushing too intensely. Their evolution lies in learning when to act and when to pause. May, the archetype of the creator or the lover of simplicity. May represents a period of beauty, flowering, and solidity. Nature is in full expansion and there's a tranquil force in the atmosphere. Jung would connect May with the archetype of the creator, one who appreciates realization, patience, and life's pleasures. People born in May often possess a grounded and sensual nature. They find consolation in routine, appreciate beauty, and are intimately connected to the physical world. They might be attracted to art, nature, food, and all elements that involve the senses. There exists a nurturing and faithful quality in them, and they tend to be stable in their activities. The trial for individuals born in May is avoiding becoming too inflexible or excessively attached to comfort. The creator can oppose change for fear of losing stability. Their evolution comes through learning how to embrace growth without sacrificing their deep connection with what is authentic and permanent. June, the archetype of the explorer or the mediator. June is situated at the center of the year, balancing the first part with what must still come. It's a period of brightness, curiosity, and movement. According to Jung's symbolic conception, June resonates with the archetype of the explorer, one who desires understanding, connection, and truth. Those born in June often possess agile minds and open hearts. They are curious, flexible, and socially skilled. Often there exists lively and youthful energy in them mixed with a deep need to explore existence's most important questions. They are excellent communicators and tend to have a strong desire to connect concepts, people, and experiences. The explorer's challenge is focus. With so many interests and ideas, they can struggle to maintain a path or decision. They can also be overwhelmed by thinking excessively or trying to satisfy everyone. Their growth lies in learning to center themselves while continuing to explore the world. The second 6 months of the year. As we continue our symbolic journey through the year's months, we now turn to the second part, from July to December. These months carry deeper energies, often more intricate. Jung believed that the year's latter portion reflected maturation processes, emotional depth, and a more intense call to transformation and meaning. July, the archetype of the guardian or the nurturer. July arrives with warmth, family gatherings, and emotional richness. It's a month deeply connected to care, connection, and inner life. Jung would connect July with the archetype of the nurturer or guardian, those who are instinctively attuned to others' emotional needs. People born in July often possess strong emotional intelligence. They can be deeply empathetic, compassionate, and intensely loyal toward those they love. Usually there exists a strong connection to family, origins, memory, and tradition. These individuals often become the emotional nucleus of their communities, offering security and comfort to those around them. However, the nurturer's shadow can be self-neglect. People born in July can give so much to others that they forget to take care of themselves. They might repress their own emotions to maintain harmony. Their growth lies in learning to guard themselves as much as they guard others. August, the archetype of the leader or the ruler. August carries bold and radiant energy. It's a period of full expression, confidence, vitality, and visibility. For Jung, this month reflects the archetype of the king or queen, also known as the ruler. Those born in August often possess a dominant presence. They possess natural command qualities, a strong sense of identity, and a deep desire to have an impact. While they may enjoy attention, usually it's because they feel called to guide, serve, or conduct others toward something higher. However, command comes with its trials. The ruler can fall into pride, control, or even isolation if they feel misunderstood or unsupported. Individuals born in August evolve by learning humility, compassion, and the importance of shared power. When they are in balance, they become true prophets, empowering others while walking with strength and grace. September, the archetype of the scholar or the perfectionist. September carries with it the passage toward autumn in the northern hemisphere. It's a period of harvest, organization, and preparation. Jung connected this period with the archetype of the scholar, one who seeks to understand the world through logic, order, and clarity. Those born in September often possess sharp minds and a natural ability to create structure from disorder. They are detail-oriented, disciplined, and attracted to tasks requiring concentration and precision. They might be planners, organizers, researchers, people who feel most at peace when everything is in its place. But the scholar's strength can become a burden when it leans toward perfectionism. Individuals born in September can be excessively self-critical or rigid. They may fear mistakes and struggle to accept uncertainty. Their growth path lies in learning to embrace imperfection as part of the human experience and allowing space for spontaneity, creativity, and self-compassion. October, the archetype of the mediator or the artist. October is a period of beauty, balance, and changing colors. This month's energy is of harmony, aesthetics, and emotional connection. Jung saw October as embodiment of the archetype of the mediator or artist, those who seek peace, beauty, and unity amid existence's dualities. People born in October are often gifted in relationships. They possess a natural sense of justice, an eye for beauty, and a deep desire to unite people, whether through art, conversation, or simply their presence. They build connections where others see divisions. Many individuals born in October are romantic at heart, valuing love, truth, and deep emotional connection. The shadow side of this archetype is fear of conflict. Mediators can avoid confrontation to preserve peace, even when it comes at personal cost. Their growth involves learning to stand firmly in their truth, knowing that true harmony is not about avoiding conflict but resolving it consciously. November, the archetype of the magician or the deep transformer. November is a month wrapped in mystery. Light diminishes, the world becomes quieter, and we begin to turn inward. For Jung, this is a deeply symbolic period, a month governed by the archetype of the magician or transformer. Those born in November are often intense, intuitive, and spiritually oriented. They carry within themselves a desire to go beyond appearances and discover what lies beneath. These are individuals who don't fear confronting darkness, whether in themselves or others. They are truth seekers, often undergoing deep personal transformations during their existences. The magician's journey is not simple. It involves pain, surrender, and rebirth. People born in November may go through cycles of loss and renewal, constantly evolving. Their challenge is trusting the process and not becoming overwhelmed by it. When they embrace their depth without fear, they become powerful healers and guides for others. December, the archetype of the enlightened master or the visionary sage. December marks the year's conclusion, a period of endings, reflection, and hope for new beginnings. Jung saw this month as aligned with the archetype of the enlightened master or visionary sage. People born in December often carry a mixture of maturity and optimism. They reflect on the past with wisdom while looking to the future with faith. These individuals tend to have a broad vision of existence and are often philosophical, spiritual, or idealistic in nature. They may feel drawn to share their illuminations with others, to guide, inspire, or expand consciousness. But even the sage faces trials. They can become disconnected from the present, excessively focused on abstract ideas, or disillusioned when existence doesn't correspond to their ideals. Their growth path involves anchoring their wisdom in daily life, using it not just to think or teach but to live meaningfully. Conclusion: your symbolic journey. As we have seen, each birth month through Jung's symbolic lens reflects a different facet of human experience, from January's quietude to December's expansive vision. The calendar becomes more than a tool for measuring time. It becomes a symbolic guide for understanding your inner universe. Jung never intended for these archetypes to define or limit anyone. Rather, he saw them as keys, starting points for a deeper dialogue with the soul. The archetype associated with your birth month can highlight your natural strengths, emotional tendencies, and the existential themes you are here to explore, but it's up to you to work with these symbols consciously. True transformation doesn't derive only from knowing your archetype, it derives from integrating it into how you live, how you choose, and how you grow. Jung called this process individualization, becoming the most complete and authentic version of yourself. That journey is unique for each person, and the more you learn to recognize the symbolic forces at play in your existence, the more freedom you have to shape your destiny with awareness and meaning. Your birth month doesn't define you, but it can reveal something essential about the path your soul is traveling. And now that you have glimpsed this guidance, perhaps you will see yourself and your story with new eyes.
Imagine if I revealed to you that your consciousness vibrates on a wavelength that only 1% of the world's population can truly decipher? That the reflections passing through your mind right now could constitute evidence of a psychic phenomenon that Carl Jung analyzed for entire decades. Contemporary investigations indicate that many of these exceptional consciousnesses concentrate around particular character structures, especially the INFJ and INEJ profiles that Jung himself would have identified. Stay here with me, because by the end of this content you'll understand if you possess one of the most unusual mental patterns known to mind science. And believe me, the 8th characteristic will radically transform your perception of your cognitive universe. But before continuing, like the video, share it with people who could benefit from it, and write in the comments which city you're following our YouTube channel from. Carl Jung stated, "The privilege of existence consists in becoming authentically oneself. But what happens when your true essence moves on a frequency that appears alien to everyone around you? What occurs when your consciousness processes reality through modalities that leave others bewildered, intimidated, or simply unable to follow your mental pathways?" According to Carl Jung, there exists a minuscule fraction of people whose minds operate through mechanisms radically different from the masses. These aren't simply intellectually gifted subjects. Intelligence is widespread. These are individuals whose awareness functions in dimensions that the majority of people can't even intuit, let alone decipher. But here's the fascinating aspect, and I'd like you to pay maximum attention to this point. Jung revealed that frequently these subjects don't even notice how particular their mental structure is. They spend years feeling like strangers, wondering why discussions seem superficial, why others seem unable to grasp obvious connections, why their intuitions are received with blank stares or embarrassing silences. Does this sound familiar? Keep following the content, because we're about to explore the 8 unmistakable indicators that prove your mind belongs to that elusive 1%. First indicator: you conceive patterns and connections that escape others. Carl Jung revealed that some individuals possess what he defined as inward-directed intuition, the ability to recognize patterns and connections that remain hidden from the majority of people. If you possess this type of mind, you don't just perceive isolated events or single pieces of information. You see the network that unites them all together. But it's precisely here that the situation becomes truly interesting. And this could clarify why you felt different your entire existence. When you participate in a conversation, While others focus on the words expressed, your mind simultaneously processes emotional nuances, historical context, psychic implications, and future consequences. You're not simply hearing what someone is saying. You're understanding what they mean to say, why they mean it, and what it reveals about their inner universe. According to Carl Jung, this ability derives from what he himself called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche that the majority of people never access. Those with this rare mentality can draw from this reservoir of universal patterns and archetypal wisdom without even realizing it. Here's a test. When you watch a movie or read a book, do you find yourself anticipating plot twists not based on obvious clues, but because you intuit the underlying narrative pattern? Does it often happen that you complete others' sentences, not because you're telepathic, but because you can perceive the direction their thoughts are heading? If you're nodding, you're beginning to understand why 99% of people find your mind incomprehensible. You're operating on multiple levels simultaneously, while they're concentrated on just one. But wait, there's something even deeper about this pattern recognition ability discovered by Jung that leads us directly to the second indicator. Second signal. You perceive reality through overlapping layers. Carl Jung declared, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves." But what happens when we naturally perceive these layers of meaning that Jung referred to, while others remain trapped on the surface? If you have this type of rare mind, you don't just experience events. You live the multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. When someone tells you they're fine, you don't just hear the word. You perceive the underlying emotional current, the body language that contradicts their statement, the active psychological defense mechanisms, and the deeper narrative their unconscious is trying to communicate. This is what Jung called deep psychological perception, and it's precisely why the majority of people can't understand your mind. While they process information sequentially and literally, you experience reality as a multidimensional fabric. Here's what's fundamental to understand, and this explains much of your existential experiences. When you try to share these layered insights with others, they often react with confusion or rejection. It's not because they lack intelligence. It's because they literally can't perceive the layers you're describing to them. Your insights seem to emerge from nowhere, as if you were creating non-existent connections. But Jung discovered something extraordinary in individuals with this cognitive pattern. They often become bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds. They can translate the symbolic language of the psyche into concepts that others can begin to understand. Reflect on this. Do you naturally understand metaphors, symbols, and abstract concepts that others struggle with? Do you often communicate through stories, analogies, or examples because direct explanations don't seem to work? This brings us to an even more fascinating aspect of your unique mental architecture. Third signal. You're magnetically attracted to the dark side of human nature. According to Carl Jung, one of the most revealing indicators of a rare mind is an inexplicable fascination with what he called the shadow, the darker and hidden aspects of human nature that the majority of people desperately try to ignore or deny. If you possess this type of consciousness, you don't just recognize that everyone has a dark side. You're genuinely curious about it. You want to understand why people commit terrible actions, what drives destructive behaviors, and how the human psyche can contain such contradictions. But here's what makes all this truly extraordinary and why it disturbs so many people. While others are content to label certain behaviors as simply evil or wrong, your mind seeks to understand the underlying psychological mechanisms. You're not justifying harmful actions. You're trying to understand the human condition in its totality. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining luminous figures, but by making the darkness conscious." Your mind is naturally drawn to this process of making the unconscious conscious, of exploring the forbidden territories of the psyche. This is why you might feel attracted to complex and morally ambiguous characters in literature and cinema, drawn to crime stories not for their shocking value, but for psychological insights, fascinated by philosophy, psychology, and fields that explore the depths of human experience, and engaged by conversations on topics that others find uncomfortable or taboo. But here's the key insight Jung discovered. This fascination with the shadow isn't morbid curiosity. It's a sign of psychological maturity and integration. You understand that to truly know yourself and others, you must recognize the entire spectrum of human potential. The majority of people find this situation disturbing because they're still in a state of psychological splitting: good versus evil, right versus wrong, light versus darkness. Your mind has moved beyond these simplistic categories, reaching a more nuanced understanding of human nature. And this brings us to perhaps the most isolating aspect of having this type of rare consciousness. Fourth signal: you feel like you're speaking a different language. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often experience what he called psychological loneliness, the feeling that no one truly understands the language of their inner world. If you have this type of mentality, you've probably lived through countless conversations where you felt like you were speaking in code. You share what seems like a simple observation only to receive blank stares or responses that didn't grasp the point at all. Here's what's happening at a deeper level, and this will explain much of your social experiences. Your mind naturally communicates through symbols, metaphors, and multi-layered meanings. When you speak, you're not just transmitting information. You're transmitting entire conceptual frameworks, emotional plots, and insights. But the majority of people can only receive superficial and literal communications. According to Carl Jung, this communication gap isn't a flaw in your way of thinking. It's proof that your consciousness operates at a frequency that transcends ordinary awareness. You're like a radio station transmitting in HD, while most people only have AM receivers. Think about it. How many times have you simplified your thoughts just to be understood? How often do you find yourself saying, "never mind," because explaining your actual viewpoint would require too much context? This is why you might gravitate toward written communication, where you can elaborate your thoughts more carefully, prefer one-on-one conversations rather than group discussions, and find creative expression as a means to express what words can't capture, because sometimes it seems easier than trying to translate your inner world. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. This communication challenge isn't an obstacle to overcome. It's a door to deeper understanding. Your unique language is an invitation for others to expand their consciousness. And this brings us to a sign that might surprise you. Fifth sign: you're not comfortable with pure logic. It might seem counterintuitive, but Carl Jung discovered that individuals with rare minds often feel limited by purely logical thinking. If you have this cognitive pattern, you don't reject logic. You recognize its limitations. While others rely on linear reasoning and cause and effect thinking, your mind operates through what Jung called intuitive logic, a form of understanding that incorporates emotions, symbolism, paradoxes, and nonlinear connections. Here's why this makes it so difficult for others to understand you. When faced with a problem, while others create logical sequences step by step, your mind processes multiple variables simultaneously. You're not just considering what makes logical sense, but also what feels right, what aligns with deeper patterns, and what respects the complexity of the situation. According to Carl Jung, this isn't an inferior way of thinking. It's a superior integration. You're not abandoning logic. You're placing it within a more complete framework that includes intuition, emotion, and unconscious wisdom. This is why you should trust your instinct even when you can't explain it logically. Learn to identify flaws in technically valid arguments that somehow miss the point. Prefer creative problem solving to mechanical rule application, and feel frustrated by people who ignore everything that can't be measured or quantified. But here's Jung's profound insight. This discomfort with pure logic isn't a weakness. It's a sign that your mind has integrated multiple ways of knowing to achieve a more complete understanding of reality. Most people operate based on logic or emotions, thinking or feelings, rationality or intuition. Your rare mind has learned to dance between these modalities, creating a symphony of understanding that sounds like chaos to those who can only hear one instrument at a time. And this integration leads us to one of the most powerful signs of this rare consciousness. Sixth signal, you see through social masks effortlessly. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to understanding ourselves." But what happens when we naturally perceive the masks people wear, the personalities they present to the world, and the authentic self hiding underneath? If you have this type of rare mind, you don't just notice when someone isn't being authentic. You can see the specific ways they're protecting themselves, the fears driving their behavior, and the genuine person struggling to emerge behind their social costume. This ability is both a gift and a burden. And here's why it makes you so incomprehensible to others. While most people accept social interactions for what they are, your mind constantly processes the subtext. You're reading micro-expressions, noticing congruence between words and body language, perceiving emotional undercurrents that completely escape others. According to Carl Jung, this perception derives from your natural access to what he called active imagination, the ability to see beyond the literal surface of things into their deeper psychological reality. But here's what's truly extraordinary. You don't just see through masks. You understand why people wear them. You recognize the protective function of personas, the vulnerability hiding behind defensive behaviors, and the universal human need to feel safe and accepted. This is why you might find yourself naturally becoming a confidant for others, even when you don't intend to. You might feel exhausted by social situations where everyone is performing, prefer authentic, vulnerable conversations to small talk, and sometimes know more about someone's inner state than they know about themselves. But here's the challenge Jung identified. This ability to see through social masks can create a profound sense of isolation. You're surrounded by people wearing costumes, speaking in code, and pretending to be someone they're not, and you're one of the few who can see the performance. This brings us to a sign that might explain some of your deepest struggles. Existential loneliness. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often experience what he called existential loneliness, a profound sense of aloneness in the universe, not because they lack social connections, but because they perceive reality in ways that seem impossible to share. If you have this type of mind, you've probably felt this deep and painful isolation that has nothing to do with how many people surround you. You can be in a crowded room and still feel like the only person of your species on the planet. Here's what's happening at a psychological level, and this explains much of your inner experience. Your consciousness naturally gravitates toward the big questions. Why are we here? What is the meaning of existence? How do we reconcile the beauty and suffering of life? While others are content with surface-level living, your mind constantly grapples with the fundamental mysteries of existence. According to Carl Jung, this existential orientation isn't depression or morbidity. It's a sign of psychological depth and spiritual maturity. You don't settle for superficial answers because your mind demands authentic understanding. But here's the profound challenge. When you try to share these existential insights and questions with others, they often respond with discomfort, rejection, or attempts to redirect the conversation to more practical matters. This is why you might find yourself feeling more understood by books, art, or music than by people. You might find yourself seeking meaning in experiences others take for granted, questioning social assumptions everyone else accepts without thinking, and feeling like you're from another planet when others seem satisfied with superficial explanations. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you really are." But what happens when who you really are seems to exist in a dimension others can't perceive? This existential loneliness isn't a flaw in your psychology. It's proof that your consciousness has expanded beyond conventional boundaries of awareness. You're experiencing the vastness of existence, while others remain focused on the narrow circle of daily concerns. And this brings us to the final and deepest sign of this rare consciousness. Eighth signal, you're naturally drawn to transformation. Carl Jung discovered that the rarest minds are magnetically attracted to transformation. Not just personal growth, but the alchemical process of fundamental change he called individuation. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, you might be one of those rare individuals who embody what Jung called the introverted intuitive, someone naturally drawn to the depths of personal transformation. If you have this type of awareness, you don't just want to improve yourself. You feel called to completely transform who you are. You're attracted to experiences that destroy and rebuild you, challenge your fundamental assumptions about reality, and force you to confront the deepest aspects of your psyche. Here's what makes all this so extraordinary and why it terrifies most people. While others seek stability, predictability, and comfort, your mind craves the chaos of transformation. You're not afraid of psychological death and rebirth because you understand that's how authentic growth happens. According to Carl Jung, this attraction to transformation is the hallmark of what he called the individuated person, someone who has integrated their conscious and unconscious mind, embraced their shadow and light, and become a complete human being. But here's the profound insight Jung discovered. This process of transformation isn't optional for minds like yours. You're not choosing to go through intense periods of change. You're called by something deeper than your conscious will. This is why you might find yourself repeatedly drawn to experiences others would avoid, naturally seeking challenges that force you to grow, feeling restless when life becomes too comfortable or predictable, and understanding that crisis often precedes breakthrough. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Your rare mind doesn't just accept this challenge. It embraces it as the fundamental purpose of existence. Most people spend their lives avoiding transformation, clinging to familiar patterns and resisting the call to become who they truly are. Your consciousness operates from the awareness that transformation isn't something that happens to you. It's something you actively participate in as a co-creator of your becoming. So there you have it. The 8 unmistakable signs that you possess a mind that 99% of people simply cannot understand. If you've recognized yourself in these patterns, you're not alone in your uniqueness. You're part of a rare community of consciousness that Carl Jung spent his life studying and celebrating. But here's what I want you to understand in conclusion. Your different mind isn't a burden to bear. It's a gift to the world. Carl Jung discovered that individuals with this rare cognitive pattern often become bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds, translators of the symbolic language of the psyche, and catalysts for transformation in others. Your ability to see patterns that others don't grasp, to perceive reality in layers, to understand the dark aspects of human nature, to speak the language of symbols and metaphors, to integrate multiple ways of knowing, to see through social masks, to confront existential questions, and to embrace transformation. These are not signs of brokenness or negative difference. They are signs that your consciousness has expanded beyond the normal boundaries of awareness. What if the person you need to forgive most isn't the one who hurt you, but the one who lives in your subconscious? What if the healing process didn't mean changing your relationship with your mother, but transforming your relationship with her representation that continues to dominate you? This content will explore a disturbing reality that many prefer to ignore: the influence of the maternal archetype on your emotional growth, on the construction of your identity, and on your possibility to exist in freedom. Based on the thinking of Carl Gustav Jung, this doesn't represent a comfortable journey, but it proves indispensable. Because until you confront this dimension of yourself, healing will always appear to you like an unreachable mirage. But before we continue, like the video, share it with people who could benefit from it, and write in the comments which city you follow our YouTube channel from. Now let's begin our journey. Carl Jung introduced the expression mother complex to define the deep unconscious patterns that we develop in childhood around the maternal presence. These patterns persist well beyond our maturation, guiding our reactions, our expectations, and our emotional attitudes. The mother complex doesn't mean blaming the mother. It means recognizing how her psychic trace continues to exist in your inner universe. Frequently, these traces shape our emotional responses in ways that contradict reason. You might feel devastated by criticism, unable to welcome affection without suspicion or dependent on seeking others' approval. These don't simply represent imperfections. They constitute signals of an inner screenplay composed in your early years, when your nervous system was still understanding what protection meant. Even if your mother was physically beside you, the emotional vibration she imprinted might be a source of disorientation or even suffering. Perhaps she offered affection that appeared subordinated to conditions. Perhaps she demanded more than you could offer her. Perhaps she was so absorbed in her difficulties that there was no place for yours. These situations don't just hurt. They instruct you on who you think you are. You're not arguing with your mother. You're fighting against an inherited voice that continues to whisper through your anxieties and your routines. Recognizing this dynamic represents the first gesture of emancipation. But recognition alone proves insufficient. We must analyze the psychic mechanism that feeds it, the archetype itself. In Jungian theory, archetypes are not individuals. They are essential patterns of experience and feeling, universal across time and cultures. The archetype of the maternal figure is among the most influential. In its best aspect, it symbolizes nourishment, protection, and origin. But when it's not integrated or undergoes distortions, it can transform into a prison that expresses itself through control, terror of abandonment, or subordination. This inner mother is not always benevolent. Sometimes she is severe, judgmental, and inflexible. She tells you that you must achieve perfection to deserve love and that you must sacrifice yourself to obtain acceptance. She whispers that your needs are exaggerated, your boundaries egocentric, your aspiration risky. And although this voice may have the intonation or vocabulary of your mother, it dwells within you. Now, what proves even worse, you carry this archetype into your adult relationships. You might demand that your partners liberate you, make you grow, that they heal a wound they didn't cause. And when they fail to satisfy this invisible criterion, you feel abandoned again. But they're not the ones leaving you. It's the archetype that projects onto them the never-satisfied infantile needs. To break this vicious circle, you must name the archetype, detach yourself from it. Observe when your behavior is directed by this internalized maternal image. This is how to cease being dominated by the myth and begin to build a new narration. But even when you try to rewrite your inner story, another force silently blocks you. The concept of invisible loyalty by Bert Hellinger reveals one of the most deeply rooted psychological connections. The belief that healing beyond your parents' pain constitutes an act of disloyalty. Deep within you there might exist an unconscious pact, a silent vow. You never chose to carry your mother's burdens so that she wouldn't have to bear them alone. This loyalty manifests in self-sabotage. You don't achieve your goals precisely when success is within reach. You distance yourself from love precisely when you begin to feel protected. You reject your desires because you perceive them as too intense. These are not accidents. They are the echo of a child who learned that surpassing the mother's emotional experience meant threatening her affection or losing her completely. You might even find yourself replicating her pain as a form of connection. If she was isolated, you remained isolated. If she was silenced, you hesitate to express your opinions. This unconscious mirroring appears as solidarity, but in reality, it's emotional stagnation. You cannot duplicate her suffering, and your existence is not her redemption story. Here, healing is not rebellion. It's a realignment. It's the courage to declare, I honor you not by remaining stuck, but by being reborn. I love you not by echoing your wounds, but by healing them within me. Before continuing, if this video helps you see things more clearly, you could share it with someone who needs it. And if you want to support this type of interesting content, you can click the thanks button below. Your support is really helpful. Now let's continue. The most effective step to break this pattern is re-educating yourself. This means learning to give yourself the care, guidance, and compassion that you might never have received consistently. It's about becoming the mother your inner child needed. Everything begins with listening. When you feel sad, don't ignore it. When fear manifests, don't neglect it. When you feel overwhelmed, don't punish yourself for your vulnerability. Instead, ask yourself, what do I need now? What would a loving mother tell me in this moment? This form of inner parenting is not permissive. It's disciplined. It requires vigilance to notice when the same dynamics repeat, when your inner critic is gaining ground, or when your boundaries begin to dissolve to maintain harmony. You must become both the one who nourishes and the one who protects. Validate your feelings, but also guide yourself with truth. Overcome failures without falling into shame. Grant rest without guilt. Celebrate without authorization. This is the rebirth of self-esteem. And if it seems strange to you, it's because you're doing something no one taught you. But as you practice, this inner relationship becomes the foundation for all others. From this space, you can finally stop projecting the archetype onto others and meet them as equals, which brings us to the final transformation. Breaking patterns doesn't mean erasing the past. It means choosing not to let it define you. You might never receive the apologies you deserve. You might never have the maternal presence you desired. But that's not the point. The point is that you're no longer a child. Now you can choose. You can choose to stop identifying with the wounded version of yourself. You can choose to abandon the myth that for healing it's necessary for someone else to change. And you can choose to stop living according to rules written for a version of you that no longer exists. This is not a denial of pain. It's the conscious decision to stop making pain your dwelling. Begin to notice the small moments when you accept to avoid guilt, when you shrink to avoid envy, when you apologize for taking up space. These are access points. They are echoes of the inner mother's voice. Question them. Ask yourself, who taught me this? And do I want to carry it with me still? This is where emotional maturity begins. When you stop acting out of habit and begin acting intentionally. When you let your values, not your wounds, guide you. When you notice yourself following a pattern, stop, breathe, and choose again. This is how the pattern concludes in real life. Not a single dramatic moment, but 1,000 small revolutions. And it's not just about stopping the pain. It's about opening space for something new. A joy that doesn't need authorization. A self-esteem that doesn't need proof. A love that doesn't come at the expense of your dignity. This is what you reclaim when you stop being loyal to what destroyed you. Let your adult self speak. Let your clarity become stronger than the shame you inherited. Let your boundaries protect you, not like a wall, but like a home. Because this means being free. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of power. A power that comes from no longer having to wait, from finally being able to choose yourself. It's not necessary to sever ties with your mother to heal, but you must redefine her place in your psyche. Stop waiting for her to show up differently. Start showing up differently yourself. The mother you seek is not behind you. She is within you. She is you. The more consciously you integrate her, the less you'll need her externally. And from that place you can love without dependence, without resentment, without distortions. If this video has moved you, leave a comment below. I am the end of the pattern. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more honest, deep, and transformative content. Share it with someone who is ready to reclaim their inner life. This is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of parenthood. The moment you take the pen back in your hand, you no longer need to be perfect. You just need to be present. You are not your wound. You are the one healing it. And this changes everything. Have you ever wondered why certain women live in solitude? Without a partner, without a companion, without even giving the impression of seeking one. The answer doesn't lie in loneliness, in lack of possibilities, or in a broken heart. It's found in something more uncomfortable, more unsettling, something that dismantles everything we've been taught about the feminine role. Because when a woman decides to be alone, she's not getting lost. She's rediscovering herself. And this type of personal rediscovery doesn't come with applause, likes, or company. It comes with silence, strength, and a type of freedom that many people still don't understand. No, she's not lonely. She's selective. She's not cold. She simply got tired of burning for people who never wanted to feel that warmth. There's something profoundly threatening about a woman who doesn't need a relationship to feel complete. Because this shatters the logic of control, dismantles the myth of emotional dependency, and reveals a brutal truth. But before we continue, like the video, share it with people who could benefit from it, and write in the comments from which city you follow our YouTube channel. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't need to be saved. And many women are still learning to recognize themselves in that silent, yet deafening mirror of power. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of our shadow. And many of these single women are actually a reflection of the collective shadow. They are what many dream of becoming, but few have the courage to embody. They don't scream for love. They whisper their choices. They don't put themselves on display to attract attention. They retreat to preserve themselves. They're less interested in Prince Charmings and more in their own inner peace. And this makes people uncomfortable because while the world demands urgency in being with someone, these women have discovered the power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend isn't lost. She's operating on a different level, a level where nothing is begged for. It's chosen, where approval isn't necessary, presence is enough. And maybe that's why she unleashes so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to label or explain her. But what many still don't understand is that behind her apparent absence there's a presence that fills, that transcends, that challenges the emotional status quo. She doesn't want just any love. She wants something that doesn't diminish her. And until that arrives, she remains strong, whole, complete. Maybe you don't understand it right now. Maybe you think it's exaggeration, pride, or disguised emotional damage. But deep down, very deep down, there's a question inside you. A silent question that pulses even when you try to ignore it. What if that silent path were actually the only one that leads to the most important type of love? The one that begins with you. The silence that surrounds a woman who lives alone isn't emptiness. It's a sanctuary. And those who don't understand the value of that space often call her cold, distant, or even arrogant. But what few people see is that she didn't build that fortress to keep the world out. She built it to not lose herself. Carl Jung also said that everything we don't face in ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. And maybe that's why so many women still confuse solitude with absence, when in reality, it can be the fertile ground for self-discovery. While most people seek to fill themselves through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward. And there, in the vastness of her own unconscious, she faced the ghosts she had avoided for years. Childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments disguised as love. Her decision to be alone didn't come from an open wound, but from a scar finally healed. She didn't stop believing in love. She just stopped accepting what others called love when it only made her feel smaller. This woman knows chaos. She has loved until losing herself. She has given too much. She has begged for crumbs that should never have been offered in the first place. But at some point, she woke up. And that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a series of disappointments that stopped hurting and started teaching. What you see now isn't coldness. It's emotional maturity. And maturity is scary because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't want just any company. She wants reciprocity. She's no longer attracted to promises, but to real presence. So maybe that's why she seems unreachable to many. Because she doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be seen. And that requires more than charm or sweet words. It requires courage to dive into the depths where few dare to go. And that's where many give up. Not because she's difficult, but because she's whole. And when a woman becomes whole, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who are also seeking that completeness. Fear from those who still live in halves, waiting for someone else to make them feel complete. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by whim of fate, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman isn't hiding. She's protecting herself. There's a vast difference between isolating and preserving oneself. But the world doesn't easily accept a woman like this. A world that still preaches that happily ever after only exists in pairs. A world that distrusts those without a partner, as if it were a sign of failure. Carl Jung once said that where convention rules, there's little room for authenticity. And this woman doesn't live by convention. She lives by essence. She hears phrases like, "You're too picky. You should be more open. Nobody's perfect." And she smiles. A calm, steady, almost ironic smile, because she knows that what many call being picky is simply the bare minimum. The minimum it took her decades to realize she deserves. She's not looking for perfection. She's looking for someone mature enough to love without destroying. Someone who has done the inner work she has already faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you find on just any corner. The discomfort she causes isn't in what she says, it's in what she represents. She's living proof that it's possible to be happy without depending on anyone else. And that tears off masks. Men who feed on female insecurity feel threatened. Women still trapped in the need for approval feel judged. But she's not here to confront anyone. She's simply being. And the authenticity of someone who has freed herself is by itself a brutal mirror for those still living in chains. This woman isn't in a hurry. She doesn't need to rush things to please anyone. She respects her own pace. And for that she stirs a silent fury in a society that wants everything now. She wants depth while the world chases distractions. She wants presence while the world offers only superficial availability. She yearns for soul-level connections while everyone else is trying to look interesting in the next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not a game, it's truth. When she leaves, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she chooses to stay home instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance. It's clarity. And that clarity earned through pain and surrender is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act, being, is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Maybe what disturbs people most about this woman isn't her solitude. It's the peace she's found within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey that she undertook. It wasn't easy. It was an exhausting process of removing masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependency, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself through the eyes of others. She sees herself through her own eyes. And that changes everything. How many times have you wondered if being alone is failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the need to justify yourself for not having someone by your side? This woman felt that too. She once thought there was something wrong with her for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even unhappy ones. But one day she understood that it's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day she made a pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than what she truly deserves. Her path isn't a straight line. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence. But there's also a strength that grows with each decision made with awareness. She learned that true love doesn't cage, doesn't consume, doesn't manipulate. The love she wants is the kind that liberates, that adds, that supports without suffocating. And until that love arrives, she chooses to keep growing alone. Not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She shattered, faced her shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more whole than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she refuses to be half of anything again. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone to share that awareness with. It's intimidating because it demands emotional responsibility. And sadly, few are willing to love responsibly. Most still love out of lack, out of possession, out of fear. And if she walks alone today, it's because every step resonates with learning. Every no she gives is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And that certainty born from the deepest part of her soul transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has rediscovered herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend isn't the same woman who once begged to be loved. Something inside her broke, and it was precisely that break that set her free. Because sometimes only in collapse does the soul find its new form. Carl Jung used to say that the tree that grows to heaven must also have roots that reach down to hell. And that's exactly what she lived through. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pain, traumas that weren't just hers, but those of all the women who came before her. She broke cycles. She said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script. She learned that it wasn't her job to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of being alone. And when she stopped accepting less, the world tried to convince her she was wrong. But she stood her ground, first with uncertainty, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability, because someone who has lived in their own abyss no longer fears absence. She learns to nourish herself with silence, to warm herself with her own presence. She's not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a world of difference between opening your heart and letting yourself be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come in truth, not with rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to tell the difference between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp. Her energy is a filter. She can sense from afar what lacks depth, and she doesn't hesitate to walk away. Her transformation isn't superficial. It's archetypal. It's as if she's tapped into an ancient wisdom, an old memory that women weren't born to serve, but to express themselves, not to be molded, but to overflow. And in accessing that memory, something awakened in her, a wild woman, intuitive, emotionally sovereign, a woman who, though alone, is far from lost. She's in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her with labels, cold, difficult, distant, nothing sticks because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She does the choosing. And that reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine. But she's no longer there. She's already crossed the threshold. And on the other side, she discovered that the real relationship begins only after you've loved yourself enough to not need anyone. There's something sacred about the way she walks through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is quiet, and it's in that silence that her true strength lives. Carl Jung said that everything we face within eventually becomes our destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, in choosing herself again and again, has become the author of a destiny that few can understand but many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises or convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life because she's learned that presence should never be begged for. It should be invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply declines. She doesn't react with anger or bitterness. She steps away with the dignity of someone who's gotten lost too many times to let the same wound happen again. What few people understand is that this woman still yearns for love. She still wants to be held, touched, chosen. But she wants it without losing herself because she spent too long trying to squeeze into molds too small for the soul she carries. Now, she only offers herself where there's room to be whole. And that requires a level of maturity that goes far beyond romance. It requires awareness. It requires having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She's not looking for fairy tales. She's looking for a soul alliance, a connection where there's no domination or submission, where both can grow beside each other without dimming their colors, silencing their pain, or shrinking their dreams. And if that seems too much for some, so be it. Because she'd rather wait than survive on emotional crumbs, and to many that sounds like arrogance. But it's really just self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman, a woman who has walked away from the superficial and dived into the depths, who got tired of being merely desired and chose to be respected, who chose to be alone not because she gave up on love, but because she began to understand that real love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her whole world begins to change. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before any words. Wherever she goes, the energy shifts like something in the room realigns subtly but unmistakably. This isn't mysticism. It's energy. It's the weight of someone who has already faced the most brutal inner wars and chose to return in peace. Not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being defeated. Carl Jung would say she found wholeness not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman doesn't reject love. She simply learned not to submit to unbalanced relationships where one must dim so the other can shine. She yearns to love, but in a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm. Because she realized that those who only love the pretty parts haven't yet learned what love truly is. And those who demand constant sweetness still don't understand the beauty of bitterness so necessary for growth that she's too whole to settle for halves. Too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to endure shallow bonds, and at the same time strong enough to keep choosing this path. Even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood. This is the journey of an awakened soul, giving up instant validation in exchange for deeper truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her. Women who don't need, women who don't bow, women who refuse to be molded because they challenge invisible structures, question old patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that once said a woman only has worth if she is with someone. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that, for the system, is dangerously revolutionary. So she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground, because now she knows she's not alone. She's with herself. And after everything she's lived through, that is more than enough. The love that comes after that won't be salvation. It will be celebration. It won't come to fill her. It will come to overflow. When a woman chooses to walk alone, the world rushes to convince her she's making a mistake. But deep down, she feels something aligning within her. It's not pride or rebellion. It's a rare kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence. The same wisdom Jung called individuation. The process of becoming fully who you are without masks, without compromise. And when that happens, nothing outside her has more power than the truth that pulses inside her chest. That truth doesn't need to shout. It can show itself in the way she quietly closes a door without resentment, in how she withdraws when the environment no longer nourishes her, in the way she smiles in peace, even with no one by her side. Because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It's a vow of loyalty to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. It simply is. And that is enough. The world will keep trying to tell her she's missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princess, love made for display. But she's already seen behind the curtain. She's already understood. It's not about finding someone. It's about never losing yourself again. And when that realization blooms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment. Lack becomes choice. Waiting becomes a path. And what once hurt now teaches. What once bound now sets free. You can feel it deep inside. That stirring, that spark. Maybe it's a memory, an old wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it's the image of a woman you once knew, or the woman you've become. In either case, something within you is asking to be seen more clearly, something that no longer fits in old molds, something that if you let it could completely transform how you relate to love, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than just someone who doesn't fit the mold. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it's possible to rebuild without hurry, without fear, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't walk ahead of anyone, but she doesn't follow either. She carves her own path, unique, unviable. And along that journey, she lights little fires for others who are waking up too. If something inside you was touched by this story, maybe it's because deep down you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that feeds on silence, presence, and truth. A love that can't be negotiated, begged for, or disguised. And if that love hasn't come yet, maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who no longer accepts less than she deserves. And if this message found you at the right moment or awakened someone you forgot was living inside you, then I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share this video with other women who need to remember their own strength. Like it, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Not out of impulse, but out of choice. Because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is let it keep resonating within us and through us.